Yeah. Got a few faithful rolling in now, so.
It's your fan club, Andrew. Where is innovation heading?
Okay, morning, guys.
Morning.
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 So this is the first of two panels, and by the way, you should stay for the second.
We will.
And the goal is to describe a bit of a tale of two cities. The first is the innovation that's happening where everyone thinks the innovation is happening, which is in the US. Nigel, I know you're not from the US. Are you based in the US?
Spent a lot of time there, but
Okay.
yeah.
So in the US, in Silicon Valley, specifically in AI, because that is the thing that is happening right now. And the second panel is going to be about innovation that's happening elsewhere. But I wanted to start with the US, because everyone acknowledges Silicon Valley is back, and that is where the AI movement is most prominent, France and Mistral notwithstanding. And so I wanted to start there. And we don't just want to be another panel about AI. I think people have talked in generalities about AI a lot at this conference. So I'm going to try and get a little deeper, and please feel free also to get a little deeper, especially because I know this is a particularly deep crew on the stage. Trillions of dollars are going to be put into this theme, literally. It's probably the hottest thing in investing since internet, maybe hotter, because of the impact everyone thinks it can have on the world. And George, you're involved in the details of investing in tooling and infrastructure of AI. Nigel, you're innovating in the physical substrate that is necessary to build AI. And Andrew, you're applying AI in very real ways and very real businesses. And so it has to actually mean something when it comes out of this innovation factory. So we'll cover all of that. And the first question I'll start with, and I'll start with you, George, and I'll ask everyone the same question, is what do you think people misunderstand about this trend of AI that's happening right now that's under-discussed?
So one of the things I've noticed here in seeing how this current wave around AI systems is really kind of forming is that we're really not fully understanding the real impact of what a reasoning engine means to the world. And the reason I say that is that most software for over 30 years was based on rules, right? And so Insight has been investing in software for over 30 years. We're on our 13th fund. We've got over 80 billion of assets under management.
And that's a couple of cycles, right?
And through a couple of up and down cycles. We just are in the tail end of raising our Fund 13, which officially we raised 10.7, and we should end up at 12 billion. And this has all gone into software. And so we've seen the arc of software for over 3 decades. And what I have not seen yet, as someone who's been a practitioner in software and now an investor, is this emergence of a reasoning engine. And that is something that we're really underestimating, because the challenge with software up to the last few decades is that you had to keep layering all these like rules upon rules upon rules. And ultimately, the software itself got brittle. It was hard to maintain. It was hard to be able to upgrade, manage. And now we're entering a moment where you don't have to write rules because there's a human-like cognition, a human-like intuition and reasoning that's available to us in the emergence of a generative pre-trained transformer. And that's something that I think we're really underestimating right now in terms of how, I always a few years ago would say, look, this is as much as the TAM of all of software and could be as much as the TAM of all of humanity. And the reason I say that is this has that foundational impact that I don't think I've ever seen in the last sort of 20, 30 years of building stuff.
So it sounds to me like you're saying something particularly controversial, which is despite all the hype about AI, there's not enough hype about AI.
No, well, the hype is unfortunately, we've overhyped what's going to happen in the next few years. This is not going to play out over the next few years. Honestly, there's a bunch of people that are saying we're going to reach AGI in the next few years. There's a number of reasons why that likely won't happen either. But if we course this out over the next decade, I think we're really underestimating how it's going to play out.
Great. And Nigel, building on that, if you can, from your point of view, what isn't getting talked about? What are people misunderstanding about this AI moment?
I think if you look at where most of the investment has gone, particularly from a hardware perspective, it's all about training these large models. And we are sitting on the edge of a transition towards inference, the deployment of these models on very large scale, which is still modest, to be honest. It's very expensive. Most people who are trying to deploy large models are typically losing money in doing that and hoping that the technology is going to get better and things will improve. But a bit like George, generative AI today, large language models, it's done this amazing thing of understanding the encoding scheme that we use to communicate with each other, which is language, and to share information with each other, which is language. But it's how you then wrap that up into an agent-based system to create reasoning AI, and that has all kinds of implications of how it's going to interact with the hardware as well, which I think is really exciting and potentially is going to make changes in the way hardware gets built, both from NVIDIA but also potentially from challengers as well. And I worry particularly about this kind of concept of AGI, which George mentioned, artificial general intelligence. I think that's wrong. I think that's kind of the wrong direction. I would describe it much more as artificial expert intelligence, AEI maybe. And that is this idea that you're going to build these models that are really expert in particular domains, which means you can test them, you can actually build verification around, they'll be able to reason better, they'll be able to use customers' information better, using retrieval augmentation
better
approaches, better traceability, better understanding of the reasoning that's gone behind the answers, thinking about the confidence of, just as you would, talk to an expert would tell you how confident they are in the answers that they are proposing. And an artificial expert intelligence should do the same. And what it would allow us to do is, rather than just do some simple sort of productivity improvements, it potentially allows us to change the whole process. So real innovation in business process. But going further than that, real innovation in deep tech technologies, understanding next generation drug discovery, doing much better diagnostics, developing new materials, new ways of building education systems that move beyond the sort of current approaches. So experts,
specific and narrower, not general and vague.
Yeah, because the more you try and make it general and you expect it to answer any question, you can't test it unless you know what the system is trying to do. That you can't build a verification structure around it, and we'll end up with the hallucinations that we've currently got continuing. And what we really need are these much more expert-based systems that are focused on particular areas. Maybe combining those together as it becomes more generally intelligent, but actually I think it's like super expert. It's not like just medicine or medical. They understand about breast cancer.
Prostate cancer.
Yeah, and it just understands it. And then what you do is you build around it a reinforcement learning system, because it's a tool that's being used by experts themselves. They're looking at the answers that the system is giving it, and they're able to give feedback on those, and then a reinforcement learning system can use that to actually improve the process.
And we're going to come back to that, specifically how it affects how you think about the chipset. And
there's a lot of changes coming in that direction as well.
And Andrew, so I love how practical you are. We've talked about reasoning systems, and we've talked about experts and AGI, and you're probably thinking about EBITDA. And that ultimately is where all this stuff has to get to, is real business value. So you invested in mid-market companies in the US, and those are very they're not Silicon Valley startups. They're basic companies. You roll them up, you generate profit. And so as you listen to this talk about reasoning and experts, how does that translate in your mind to real value for your business?
Great. Thanks so much, Hugh, and great to be here today. So to give a perspective, I founded Brightstar about 9 years ago. We're a mid-market firm with over $5 billion of AUM. And to give a perspective, I actually lived through the Silicon Valley experience. I was there during one of those periods of time at Stanford Business School when 100 of my classmates started businesses and 99 failed. So I'm a little bit from that vintage of
Scarred.
probably like a depression era from my grandparents of leaning towards, you have to lean on cash flow.
Is the pantry stocked? Yeah.
And I'm grateful for my co-panelists for the innovation. We actually do use technology quite a bit, and I'll give you a couple examples on that journey. We invested in a manufacturing business around health and wellness, aligned around some of the world's leading brands. And what we found was an underinvested business where within 24 hours of closing on that business, we tripled the CapEx they had spent in the prior few years on day one. And on that journey over a 2-year period, we tripled our EBITDA margins. We're able to better serve our customers. We brought innovation to our customers, and we brought morale and culture back to a workforce that had been a bit demoralized. We eventually put that company in the hands of a strategic who took it to another level because we're a part of that journey. But it opened up our eyes that we can really use innovation to transform. Now we'll talk about analog to digital. We definitely did not create fire, but we invested in a business that's been around for probably 100 years. We invested in the second largest, what is now the auto auction business in the US. That again, it's a US business, but it operates globally. These business models work in every different region. In this particular business, we transact 1 million vehicles a year. A lot of transactions. When we invested in the business, there was no talk of AI. There was very little talk of technology. And we were able to use some of our thinking. Many of us at our firm are both investors and operators by background. And we went to the company and essentially said, you know, we're a control investor, but we want to really increase your CapEx in technology and see what we can do. We shifted that business from very little digital. And by that I mean physically not being there as a car runs down in 12 seconds in an auction lane to 40% of our transactions happening digitally, whether by simulcast or pure digital. That journey's been a fun journey because if we went too much to the extreme of digital, we would have lost most of our suppliers of vehicles. They didn't want a digital-only solution, they wanted omni-channel. Then the next step in our journey has been to use AI to tell those customers, you liked these 4 types of vehicles, we're going to tell you in 3 days where the next 2 that look like those are going to be and where the transaction was. And so we're using technology to create that flywheel. I'm giving you a couple small examples of what in the US is roughly 1/3 of the GDP of the US economy, the middle market. These are 50 million people. When you think about the region we're in, it's about the size of this region from a workforce perspective. And so for us, we're not tethered by quarterly earnings. We get to make the right long-term decisions. We are not slow followers, maybe not bleeding edge, but I think for middle market private equity, we're a little bit, fast followers in terms of use of AI. We're using it also, by the way, at our own company. So we have a library of prompts. I'm lucky I have 2 partners that are PhDs. I'll joke that we're all PhDs, poor, hungry, and driven. But they themselves are actually PhDs from Harvard and Stanford. And it's great to be able to challenge the paradigm for this middle market that there is a role for AI and technology. To your point, I think the hype is there. I think, again, it'll be a little slower.
Do you have a lot of pressure to, where's the AI, where's the AI, where's the AI in your business?
The pressure is really coming from us, not from the 30,000 employees in our portfolio.
Right. They're not thinking about reasoning and inference and CUDA and
but to your point, they're thinking about how do they grow their business consistently? How do they serve their customers well? How do they retain their employees? And I will say this, they're thinking a lot of, and asking the right questions about how to grow, and that creates a solid partnership.
Awesome. I mean, I love the fluctuating between the bleeding edge and realizing the reality on the ground for 50 million people in the middle of the U.S.
But
Very
it's
different.
interesting, what I kind of took away from what you were saying there is it's not just about making the existing process a bit better. It's about re-engineering. It's about innovating and how AI can change your business processes and create innovation in the business.
So Shu and I are fortunate. We have a close partner and colleague, Marcelo Clare, who many of you have heard from during the course of the week. If there's not a day for Shu or me or for some others that Marcelo isn't challenging the paradigm and using examples like what T-Mobile's doing at a grand scale. And we completely agree. It's not about tweaking what's already being done. It's reinventing with the backbone and understanding. We're not going to tell the customer what experience they should have. We're going to listen to the customer, but redesign our processes to be more efficient.
Yeah.
So let's pick on that word, reinvention. NVIDIA is this giant that now everybody knows about. Frankly, 10 years ago, not that many people knew about. And you've had this wave of AI that's driven them to incredible value. And Nigel, you're trying to reinvent what you're doing at the chipset level. So let's get a little specific about what that means.
Yeah.
And you've talked a little bit about, you've mentioned training versus inference. You've thrown a couple of concepts out there, but I want to go a little deeper. So what do you think is missing in chip innovation that offers an opportunity for Graphcore and others, but mainly Graphcore, to come and become the next NVIDIA? Where's the innovation happening at that layer of the stack, right at the bottom?
I think it's really interesting. So first, on a sort of personal note, a little bit over 10 years ago, I sold my last company to NVIDIA, which today would be worth 200 billion transactions.
Did you keep the shares?
Some.
Not enough.
Not enough.
Clearly not enough.
Which means you didn't predict this either, right?
Who did?
Because if you did, you would have kept
Who
the
did?
shares.
But I sort
And
of
you're
did.
deep in the weeds.
So I sort of did because we believed there would be a new type of processor to support AI. And the reality of what NVIDIA has done is it's no longer really a GPU. The GPU is kind of the control engine that orchestrates what's happening, but it's all happening in tensor cores and specialized hardware that NVIDIA has added to the GPU. And so I think we're at the point now where it's really hard at the processor, inside the processor box, to come up with new innovations. Transformers works well on these evolved GPUs, let's call them.
Sure.
And I think it's inside that box, it's really hard to create innovation. But how those boxes, how those processors talk to memory, how those processors connect and coordinate with each other, huge amount of innovation is coming as the models get bigger. Simple things like in inference, there's really two big workloads. There's what's called the prefill, where you're building up the key value cache, kind of the context for what you're talking about. It's a big calculation problem. Then you're generating the tokens in an autoregressive way. The first part of that is really compute intensive. Second part is actually completely bound by memory bandwidth. Interesting things you want to do is if you're using one of these AI systems, every time you come back, you don't want to recalculate that first compute-intensive piece. You want to go and store it off in memory, bring it back, and reestablish you as a user. But you might be turning up somewhere else in the system. So also the way that these systems connect together, the interconnect in them, in training interconnect, the networking is probably about 20% of overhead on training time, and is getting bigger. In inference, it's potentially much bigger than that. And so the way that we're going to connect these systems together, because a model doesn't work on a single processor anymore. GPT-4 is about 48 GPUs all working together. Yeah. And you can't put 48 GPUs in a box. They have to sit in a rack. So we're going to have connectivity all across the rack. And the next generation of models is going to be hundreds of GPUs. So the connectivity has to spread across multiple racks in a data center.
As you talk, I can't help but think of someone like Isaac Newton, the lone genius or Darwin, who was this first version of AI, and then suddenly now you have to build a firm. And what that firm means is you don't have an Isaac Newton. You have a lot of smart people talking to each other, sending emails, sending Slacks, and that analogy has to apply also to the infrastructure that's being built for AI.
It's going to look very different.
And George, I know this is actually where you spend a lot of time, right? Is down in the weeds. And I don't know actually if you invest in chipset level companies, but where you spend your time, what are you seeing as the entry points that allow people to attack the big gorillas in AI?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that we see today that are, helping, establish this layer of infrastructure that's emerged and will continue to sort of evolve. So I'll give you a few examples of things that we've done over the last few years. So 3 companies, of course, got sold to NVIDIA earlier this year. So spent time with Jensen and team on where the software layer was going to evolve. So the first company was a company called Run AI. It's actually not fully transacted yet because it's under DOJ review, but hopefully that should come through pretty shortly. But they're basically...
You just jinxed it.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Run AI is doing fine either way, but hopefully it will transact. But they're basically building a hypervisor and a virtualization layer for GPUs. So it turns out that as you're scaling up or scaling upward, it's harder and harder to be able to bring thousands of GPUs together into a cluster, and you need a virtualization layer. And literally, Run AI was that virtualization layer directly on top of Kubernetes. It was part of the NVIDIA ecosystem, and it naturally made sense to be part of NVIDIA when that transaction occurred. The day after, a model decimization company called Deci literally can take any generalized model and make it 10x smaller, was also acquired by NVIDIA, which is an inside portfolio company that one of my partners and myself invested in. And then the day after that, Shoreline, which is basically building a resource management for GPU clouds, was acquired as well. And the reason I mentioned this...
So that was a good week.
That was a good 3 business days back to back. I don't think that's
never going to be replicated.
That has never happened in venture capital and probably won't happen again. But yeah, basically Thursday, Friday, and Monday. Yeah. Nevertheless, as we start to see these layers emerge, what we look at is where there is an opportunity to continue to grow despite the changes in, say, for instance, the foundation models getting more capable, more data coming into the model itself. So one of the investments I made a few years back is a company called Weights and Biases. It turns out that Weights and Biases is the substrate for all the experiments, the parameter tuning, the version controls that OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, Mistral, NVIDIA, and Meta all use when they're shipping their foundation models today. So 900,000 machine learning practitioners are fully standardized on Weights and Biases as a product. So those opportunities to look at the tooling, the platforms that will continue to grow in the scale of how this AI movement is playing out is an area that I spend a lot of my time, particularly from an investment standpoint. About a week ago, we announced a company called Crew AI, which has basically become a de facto multi-agentic open source platform for building these agentic frameworks today. That company and that open source initiative has well over 900,000 agents that are now deployed in the last 9 months. It was open source. It didn't even exist less than a year ago. So that's the level of dynamic change that I'm seeing in the market. And the more you can find those areas where you're supporting the growth of this infrastructure as it emerges and you're building tooling and platform, that's an area that we'll invest all day long.
Yeah, so I'm hearing, I mean, the general narrative out there is NVIDIA's won. And Google and Meta and some of these large companies are close behind in deploying a lot of CapEx, but the supplier of the picks and shovels is going to be NVIDIA indefinitely. What I'm hearing here is very, very different, actually, is that there's all this innovation happening in the next few waves of things, whether it's interconnection or memory or tooling, and there are many opportunities for other companies to come in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like, one of the things I would just say is this pie is growing. So I actually got into a conversation with Jensen about this when we were, doing our our CEO, investment day with NVIDIA a few months back. And I said something to the effect like, well, the world is actually moving from 80% training and 20% inference to 80% inference and 20% training. And like Jensen kind of looks back at it and says, there's still a lot more training left.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, there is still a lot more inference coming into the market as this, what I think of as the pie is growing. So yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity for, the next generation of everything in the stack to continue to evolve. It's not just that NVIDIA has won everything. It means that they've certainly done very well up to this point, but there's plenty of opportunity for a lot of companies to do well.
And
I
Andrew,
think
just to pull Andrew into this for a second, Nigel, as you think about the impact of this, not just on how you run the companies you invest in, but on the opportunity set for mid-market private equity in general, are a lot of these AI agents, as they become much more sophisticated, going to replace the opportunity that your companies are pursuing to solve problems? Or do you think there's still an asset class called mid-market private equity in 10 years and 20 years?
I think there's going to be a growing haves and have-nots. I think those that fail to innovate in mid-market private equity, and this is applicable not just to the US, but globally. Since I've been here, I've actually met with a number of the family conglomerates about some of their operating businesses and bringing the best.
Which probably feel very similar to businesses.
It's incredibly,
Right?
incredibly similar. I'll give you one example. We have a fleet maintenance business that's the leading fleet maintenance business in the U.S. And by fleet, I actually mean fleet. These are Rivian. These are trucks. These working for some of the largest fleets in the U.S. And we shifted that business in the past 3 years from 100% combustion engine to 70% combustion, 30% electric vehicle. We had to retrain a staff of thousands of technicians and mechanics that had never worked with software, right? That are now effectively software technicians. That has actually enabled them to enhance their compensation, to be more value add, because it's a different skill. So I actually think we're going to have this, again, haves and have-nots, and much like we look back on buggy whips or check printing businesses and others as a part of the past, we look at the opportunity set as our traditional innovation playbook with a kicker that's enhanced from use of AI. And we've done the work, okay? We're investing 7 figures per year in the use of AI just from our own account effectively. And what we hear is some of our larger competitors, the global asset managers that are here, are great. Challenges with adoption of actually pushing their teams to use it every day. The CTO might use it, the CIO might use it, but others don't. And what we're seeing is for us, because we're pushing it so hard, we're creating a language and a dialogue with our companies where everyone has capital out there, okay? There's trillions of capital. But the reason someone chooses to work with us is not the capital, it's what can they do to help grow their business? Can we be a great partner? So we have to bring these tools to the table or we will not be competitive.
All right, so lightning-ish round. And just say whatever is on top of your head. Don't think too much. FII 18. So we're FII 8. Right? So 10 years from now, we're sitting here. What are we saying about AI, George?
It is a complement to humanity that will likely change how we work, how we live, how we interact for the better. And it is something that we don't have to be as afraid of because it is not, this thing that'll destroy the world as we see it.
Love it. Nigel?
I think AI will by then become invisible. It will just be so ingrained.
Like electricity?
It will just be so ingrained in everything that we do and the way that we work that we won't even realize it's AI anymore. It's just this thing that we use, and it's a way in which we interact with new types of computers to get them to help us to solve problems.
So make that a little real. So a panel, how will this panel feel different purely as a panel in 2018 with AI embedded in everything that's happening?
Well, one of the things that's happening here in the Kingdom is a huge focus on esports, as an example. So the idea that you will be able, as an individual, to come up with a new esport You'll be able to have that all generated for you. You'll just be able to describe it in a way, conceptually of what you're looking for. You'll be able to give it some specific information, and it will come up with a new type of esport that you'd be able to launch, very, very quickly. And so we're going to see this variety of all kinds of, different entertainments, different education, different ways in which we do business, and it'll just be embedded.
Andrew, if I...
Assuming regulation doesn't kick in too big a way, it will level the global playing field, in my opinion, to allow the best to rise to the top.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, George. Thanks so much.